Good morning. Good morning. How you doing today? This is John Bennett, and we're going to be starting a new lesson series this morning. Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace. I want to kick off this morning with a quote from the Christian philosopher C.S. Lewis, where he says, "Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important." I also want to share a writing from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:12 through 19, where he says, "Now if Christ be preached that he rose from the dead, how say some among you that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there be no resurrection of the dead, then Christ is not risen. And if Christ be not risen, then our preaching vain, and your faith is also vain. Yea, and we are found false witnesses of God, because we've testified of God that he raised up Christ, whom he raised not up, if so be that the dead rise not. For if the dead rise not, then is not Christ raised. And if Christ be not raised, your faith is vain, you're yet in your sins. Then they also which are fallen asleep in Christ are perished. If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we're all men most miserable." So the things we can take away from these two statements is that Christianity makes a truth claim that hinges on the truth of the resurrection of Christ. This truth claim is a matter of fact. It is either true or false. And I'd just like to challenge you and ask you the question, can you make a case for the truth of Christianity? And if not, find out how in this study. So let's kick off with our study in Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace. We'll tell you a little bit about the author here. J. Warner Wallace is a Dateline featured cold case homicide detective, popular national speaker, and best-selling author. He continues to consult on cold case investigations while serving as a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. He's also an adjunct professor of apologetics at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University and Southern Evangelical Seminary, and a faculty member at Summit Ministries. J. Warner became a Christ follower at the age of 35 after investigating the claims of the New Testament Gospels using his skill set as a detective. He eventually earned a master's degree in theological studies from Gateway Seminary. J. Warner's appeared on television and radio, explaining the role that evidence plays in the Christian definition of faith and defending the historicity of Jesus, the reliability of the Bible, and the truth of the Christian worldview. Jim also speaks at churches, retreats, and camps as he seeks to help people become confident Christian case makers. J. Warner's book, Cold Case Christianity, provides readers with 10 principles of cold case investigations and utilizes these principles to examine the reliability of the gospel eyewitness accounts. In God's crime scene, he investigates 8 pieces of evidence in the universe to make the case for God's existence. In Forensic Faith, J. Warner makes the case for a more reasonable, evidential Christian faith. So we've gone through some of these lesson series and books and previous lessons in our apologetics group on Sunday morning. We went through Forensic Faith, and we also did his lesson series and book on Person of Interest. So we're kind of going back to the beginning here. About the Cold Case Christianity is his first book. And so we're kind of going back and playing a little catch up here. We're going to do Cold Case Christianity, and we'll also going to cover God's crime scene, in the near future. So in terms of materials for this lesson series, there's the book, which you can either buy that book. I mean, this is the book is optional. Okay, we'll be going through our lesson presentations that we'll be doing in the class are going to be based right out of the participant's guide here in the middle. So you really don't have to buy anything for the class. It may be helpful to you to read the book, and if you want to do that, that's available on Amazon or Christian Book or whatever. Audible, you can buy the book in print off of Amazon or Christian Book. It's also an Audible audio book. So that's an option if you want to read the entire book, which that's helpful. That'll shed additional light, on the material. The participant's guide is available as a separate little booklet. So our lesson series that we're presenting and going through on Sunday mornings here in our sessions is going to be directly it's going to be based on the outline in the participant's guide. And then there's a video series that goes along with this. We'll be using the videos out of the video series, and I'm also kind of capturing some additional video off YouTube that he's recorded that's relative or relevant to various topics in the study. So that's the basic material there. In terms of the lesson series roadmap, 8 sessions. Now, in the physical presentation of this in our class, we may break these up a little bit, so it may take in person more than 1 week, to go through each one of these sessions, but it's broke up in because we only have about 50 minutes of time really to go through the material in our physical in-person class. So, session 1, don't be a know-it-all, learn how to infer. Session 2, think circumstantially and test your witnesses. Session 3, hang on every word and separate artifacts from evidence. Session 4, resist conspiracy theories, know when enough is enough. So these first 4 sessions are more of a discussion of the material out of the book. You could almost draw a dividing line between session 4 and 5 because the last 4 sessions are more or less a presentation of the topics and a defense of the topics that are listed here, as opposed to really a overall discussion out of the book. But session 5 is going to answer the question, and this is in context to the Gospels, to the Gospel writers. Were they present? Session 6, were they corroborated? Session 7, were they accurate? And session 8, were they biased? So we're gonna address these topics directly in a discussion format in the final 4 sessions here. So let's kick off and just dive right straight in here to session 1. Don't be a know-it-all and learn how to infer. Okay, so don't be a know-it-all. Let's talk a little bit about that. So what we're going to talk about today, we're introducing the topic. We're going to open the case file with some discussion questions. We're going to view some video testimony. That'll be in the form of the video out of off the DVD for the lesson series. We're going to conduct a group investigation with some other group discussion questions. I'm also going to inject just a video clip for part of that discussion from YouTube. We're going to try to make a personal application here, take a personal assessment, form a strategic plan, make a closing statement, and then I'll challenge you to conduct a secondary investigation on your own afterwards. So let's move forward here. In terms of an introduction, we're going to be talking about controlling our presuppositions. Don't be a know-it-all. Don't begin, and we'll see this in the video, don't begin by thinking you know the answer before you begin. Let the evidence speak for itself. And we're also going to be talking about abductive reasoning to determine what is true and making an argument for the truth of Christianity. Okay, that's the 2 main aspects of our discussion today. So in terms of opening the case file, we'll have some questions. How would you define the word faith? Okay. Some people define faith as believing in something even when there isn't any evidence for it. So what role do you think evidence ought to play in our Christian faith? Think about how you became a Christian. What role, if any, did evidence play in your decision to become Christian? And what would you say to someone who said they didn't think there was any evidence for Christianity? Okay. Not being in the in-person portion of the presentation here, we're kind of missing out on a little bit of the discussion, but let's just jump to kind of a discussion of those questions. We had some interesting discussion of those topics, and it's great to have that discussion. Um, Faith, a biblical perspective. Okay, Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's a great definition, and this kicks off uh, Hebrews 11, which is a chapter discussing faith, and it's about the heroes of the faith. It goes on to talk about how people in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, but also the New Testament, apply faith, and how that it's impossible to please God without faith. But this is a great definition, and it gives a biblical perspective on exactly what faith is. You'll notice in the first half of this, I've always felt like a biblical uh, faith is one. It says the substance of things hoped for. I believe there's that desire is a component of biblical faith, in that we desire for the things out of the Bible to be true, and our hope in Christ, and our belief in God. Um, but there's also uh, the component that it's evidence of things not seen, and so there are a lot. Take the existence of God, for example. We can't see God directly. However, we see the evidence of God, because we know that in our experience as humans, nothing comes into being without a cause, and so we can take the evidence that there is a creation to require the necessity of a creator, and so there's evidence. There's ample evidence um, for the truth of Christianity. And so that's something that comes up in a lot of conversation. So I would encourage you to read the remainder of Hebrews 11 on your own, as it describes how we ascertain things by faith and the results of biblical faith. If we look at a dictionary definition of faith, and I take this from the Britannica dictionary. The thing that you find as you do research, especially internet research, is there's a ton of different dictionaries, and so it's hard to find one uh, dictionary definition that agrees across the spectrum. You look at the different dictionaries and you get all kinds of different definitions, but I chose this one because it was more really what I was looking for in terms of a definition. But there are other variations of these definitions depending on what dictionary you look at. And the interesting, the first out of the Britannica dictionary online was faith is a strong belief or trust in someone or something. And they also said that it could be a belief in the existence of God, or strong religious feelings or beliefs. we were discussing this at home the other day and just thinking, what is the definition of faith? And another definition of faith that you'll see in a dictionary is something along the lines of the first one here: strong belief or trust in someone or something. And it will go on to say, even when there's no evidence to support it, which I think is interesting. So here's a clip. I looked for this because I knew this clip was out there and I couldn't remember what movie it was from. But I'm going to show you the video for this. This is from the movie Miracle on 34th Street, where Faith, the lady, is telling her little girl there that faith is believing in things when common sense tells you not to. And so we're gonna put a big X on that because of the last part there, when common sense tells you not to. And here's the reason why. We'll give you this is a bonus tidbit of information. There's no extra charge for this. So bonus tidbit: your faith is only as good as its object. Okay. A lot of people treat faith as if it is a virtue in and of itself. It's great to have faith. Okay. But what I'm going to challenge you to think about is that your faith is only as good as its object. If your faith is placed in something that's not true, then I would argue that you're deceived. It's actually harmful to you, not helpful. Okay. So just to have faith, I don't see that there's any virtue in just having faith, because you want your faith to be placed in something that's true. The we were talking this morning in another conversation, but the correspondence theory of truth, that truth is that which corresponds to reality. So when we make a true statement, it is something that is true in reality. Let me give you an example of faith not placed well. But let's say a broken chair. If I've got a chair and it's sitting there and it has 4 legs and one of the legs is broken and it's just kind of sitting there. Somebody just kind of put the leg back, but it's not secured. And you look at that chair and you say, oh, well, this chair, it's a great chair. I'm going to sit in it. So you put your faith, you believe wrongly that this chair has the strength to hold you up, and you sit down in the chair and the leg falls off and you fall on the floor. So, that's an example of misplaced faith, I would say. And that applies to a lot of things in life and just in reality. So, all right. No extra charge for that. So let's go here. We're gonna watch the video here for the lesson, and then we'll come back and reconvene for the rest of the lesson here. So let's watch our video testimony, and we'll jump right back in to our lesson. So we'll catch you here in a second.
What a great setting to talk about the role of evidence and how we can use it to determine if Christianity is true. We're in a courtroom in a busy downtown area, and we got a chance in a real courtroom to actually talk about the kinds of things we actually talk about in a courtroom. So let's just begin with 2 principles that I think will help you understand the role of evidence in Christianity. 2 principles that you can take away and I think will change the way you look at the case for Christianity. The first one is a very simple one. And you might think, really? That's a detective skill? Yeah, it is. And it's simply being able to control your presuppositions. Don't be a know-it-all. It turns out that there's many times, if we're not careful, we'll think we know the answer to something before we even begin investigating. I've had cases where we've been at crime scenes and a senior partner, on the basis of maybe his 25-year experience doing this, will make a quick decision. Oh, I think it's so-and-so, or I think it's her boyfriend who did it. Really? We haven't even started to collect the evidence yet. We haven't even started to chart the potential suspects. And you think you already, listen, bud, I've been doing these kinds of cases for 25 years. I know when I see it. Now, that person might be right about his inference, but you don't begin by thinking you know the answer to something. If you do, you're liable to now, as it turns out, I had a case like this where we spent a whole week trying to find the boyfriend. It wasn't even the boyfriend. It was a brother involved. So you could be very careful about thinking you know the answer before you begin. You have to kind of start by presuming nothing. Start by just looking at the evidence and letting the evidence speak for itself. Now, I say this only because you probably know somebody in your life who has some presupposition which already excludes the Christian worldview. Maybe there's somebody, for example, who says, well, look, unless you can demonstrate something with science, I can't believe it. Well, that's a presupposition they're beginning with that might color the way they're looking at evidence. It might exclude certain approaches to evidence. They might say, well, I don't believe in anything supernatural. So whatever you're going to say about Christianity, you cannot include anything supernatural because I reject the supernatural. Really? Well, we're making a case to determine if something supernatural occurred in the first century. If you're trying to investigate that, you can't begin by thinking you know that nothing supernatural ever occurs. We're all going to have to take our presuppositions and suspend them, at least for a season, so we can look at the evidence fairly. If you're not willing to do that, don't be surprised if you won't come to the right conclusion. And help your friends, help your own kids, help yourself to try to resist the temptation to think you already know the answer. Be fair, be open-minded, and be diligent. Now, I want to give you also another way of inferring to the most reasonable explanation. It's something we call abductive reasoning. But before I begin to explain it, let me make sure you understand there's a huge distinction between what's possible and what's reasonable. As an investigator, I don't even care about what's possible. Anything and everything's possible. It's possible that you're not even watching this right now. It's possible you're just dreaming all of this, that you're in a matrix kind of world in which you haven't taken the pill yet to know that you're still in the matrix. That's possible, but it's not reasonable. The standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt in criminal trials. Why? Because you could never prove anything beyond a possible doubt. Nothing. You could prove beyond it. I could always raise some possible doubt, as ridiculous as it may be. The standard is not possible doubt, it's actually reasonable doubt. It's a little bit lower, because what we care about is the most reasonable inference from evidence. Now let me tell you how you get to the most reasonable inference from evidence. It's called abductive reasoning, but it's really also known as inferring to the most reasonable explanation. And we do this at every call-out, every crime scene. Because sometimes we get there and there's somebody dead, but it may not be a crime. There are 4 ways to die. Only one of them is criminal. We're trying to figure out, is this a natural? Is this an accidental death? Is this a suicide? Or is this a homicide? If it's a homicide, that changes everything. And our entire team is going to get involved trying to solve that. But when you get there, you've got to make a decision. Which kind of scene is it? Well, how do you make that kind of decision? Well, we use abductive reasoning. Now, what that involves is making 2 lists that begin with E. A list of evidences. All the evidence we see in the room. A list of explanations, ways to explain the evidence in the room. Let me give you an example from a death scene, for example. Okay, we make a list. We've got some dead guy on the ground. You'll see this in your participant's guide. We've got a dead guy laying on the ground. And so far, with what little we have, if there's nothing else there, just a dead person laying face down, well, how do we know what kind of death that is? That could be one of those 4 deaths. Well, we list the evidence. And as the scene is different, if there's a stab wound, or if there's a gunshot wound, or if there's a piece of evidence at the crime scene, we will start to cross out those explanations that don't make sense given the evidence in the room. Pretty simple approach. Could you use that approach to examine Christianity? Well, I think you could. As a matter of fact, I used it as a new Christian or a new investigator of Christianity to really understand the evidence for the resurrection. Now think about that. We've got a crime scene, an empty tomb, and we have to determine what's the best explanation for it. So let's make a list of the evidences in the room. I'll give you the simplest evidences that even the most skeptical scholars, for the most part, to a certain level of certainty will agree on. 70% or so would say this. Even as unbelievers, they would say, well, okay, so Jesus lived, and he was crucified, and he died on that cross and was buried. Okay, that's a pretty simple claim. Doesn't mean the resurrection is true. Doesn't mean Christianity is true. Okay, we'll add something to that. How about the fact that there's an empty tomb? Oh, okay, but that doesn't mean Christianity is true. I could explain the empty tomb some other way. Okay, how about this? The disciples, they seem to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. They reported it, and they lived their lives as though they believed it. Okay, that's fine, but that doesn't mean Christianity is true. Lots of people believe all kinds of crazy things. How about this? They actually were they were transformed after seeing the risen Christ. I mean, they were so adamant about their beliefs. Within 4 or 5 generations, the entire Roman Empire was being affected by Christianity. That still doesn't mean Christianity is true. Okay, but that's at least the minimal evidence. That's just some simple evidence in the scene that we have to explain. Well, there are a number of ways to explain that evidence. It might just be true. It might just be exactly as the Gospels reported it. The Gospels might just be accurate. Well, as a skeptic, I don't think so. There's got to be another way to explain this. For example, maybe he didn't really die on the cross. If Jesus was only badly injured and passed out, you wouldn't need a resurrection. You could actually, it's just a resuscitation. Maybe they hallucinated this. Maybe they lied about it. Maybe there was an imposter involved. Maybe this thing was a story that was changed over time. Do you see how I could offer a number of other explanations for the basic evidence surrounding the resurrection? Well, now we get to employ abductive reasoning. We simply ask the question, do these explanations work given the evidence we have in the room? Now, in your participants guide, you're going to see why I think each of the non-Christian explanations, the naturalistic explanations involving no miracle, involving no resurrection, why each of those doesn't work. They are all fatally flawed. And I want to encourage you to look through the participants guide to see why each of these doesn't work. Well, then you're going to eventually get to the Christian explanation. And I would have told you, though, as an atheist, that doesn't work either. It's also fatally flawed, I would have said. And you, well, why? Well, because it involves and requires a supernatural event called the resurrection. And I would have said, hey, you cannot include supernatural events in history. That's not history. History does not involve miracles. If you read an ancient account about something and it involves a miracle, you're now talking about mythology, not history. It's a category difference. So I would have said, no, I'm out. But now we go back to the first principle we talked about in this session, your presuppositions. Be careful about presuming you know for sure that nothing supernatural can ever occur. You don't know that for sure. And if you presume that, then of course everything seems silly if it involves a miracle. But what if that's just your bias, your presupposition talking? We said you've got to suspend presuppositions. If you do that, you'll see that the Christian explanation is by far the most robust and efficient way to explain the basic pieces of evidence in the scene. Now, I've given you 2 skills that I think you can actually use going forward. Presuppositions, making sure you don't have any of those, and 2, using abductive reasoning. Now, we actually have these call-out bags. These are bags that we use. I keep my gloves in here, you name it. Everything I need, my camera's in here, flashlights are in this bag. I've had a bag just like it for well over 15 years. And every time I wear it out, I just buy another one just like it. And what do I put in here? I put in here all the stuff that'll help me solve cases. Well, I've just given you 2 skill sets that you can put in your call-out bag. 1, be careful of presuppositions, and 2, use abductive reasoning to determine what's true. And those are skills you can take with you as you investigate any claim going forward. Those are new skills, new tools for your call-out bag so you can be the best Christian case maker God has designed you to be.
Okay, so video testimony. Just to summarize, controlling your presuppositions. We all come to the table with some presupposition, but we want to control that. Try not to be a know-it-all. We want to let the evidence, when we're really seeking truth, we want to let the evidence speak for itself. And so with the truth claims of Christianity, that's no different. We want to let the evidence speak for itself when it comes to Christianity. So we want to understand the difference between possible and reasonable. We want to employ abductive reasoning, and we want to be able to evaluate the alternative explanations for the resurrection, because there are people who will throw out alternate explanations. So we need to be prepared to understand those and to address them. So here's some. I'm going to throw out some diagrams. Group investigation here. We're going to look at some things in the following diagram from Cold Case Christianity. Fill in the three presuppositions people might possess in a jury trial, and then fill in three presuppositions people might have when considering the claims of Christianity. So we're just looking at presuppositions in general. And so this will help us kind of identify presuppositions in general and presuppositions that would apply to Christianity and people investigating Christianity. So let's look at the graphics. So here we've got some empty clouds. This is material right out of the book and out of the study guide. So what are some dangerous presuppositions for jurors? In other words, what are some presuppositions that a juror might have that would be dangerous in terms of evaluating the truth of a case at law? What are some presuppositions there? Okay, again, so we're not in the in-person group here, but there's some good discussion about this in person. And then let's look at what are some possibilities for dangerous presuppositions for truth seekers? For Christianity? What do you think would be some presuppositions that a person might come to the table with when they're evaluating the truth of Christianity? Okay, well, let's see what he's got in the book. So, okay, for jurors, people with beady eyes are suspicious. Yes, they may be suspicious. Does that mean they're guilty? No. That's a presupposition that might lead you down the wrong path. People of my race would never commit a crime like this. Okay, so that's a presupposition that could lead you off on the wrong path. Police officers are liars and are untrustworthy. Okay, so that could lead you down the wrong to a wrong conclusion there if that's a presupposition that you've got cemented in your mind. So let's translate that to presuppositions in terms of someone looking at the truth claims of or considering the truth claims of Christianity. Nothing exists outside the natural realm. Okay. If it can't be tested with my five senses, it doesn't exist. Supernatural explanations must be eliminated. Okay. All right. So let's look at this. Philosophical naturalism. The presuppositional belief that only natural laws and forces, as opposed to supernatural forces, operate in the world. So philosophical naturalists believe that nothing exists beyond the natural realm. So that is a common presupposition that someone might come to the table with, when discussing the possibility of Christianity being true. That would be an objection, potentially. So people often develop presuppositions from watching Christians in their lives. In general, how might we live as Christians to prevent our friends and family members from developing presuppositional biases against Christianity? Think about that for a second. It's helpful to point out that one of the major objections to Christianity is what? Christians are hypocrites. right? That's a major objection to Christianity. If a Christian is a hypocrite, does that mean Christianity is not true? No. But people are influenced by the fact that, some Christians are hypocrites. And so that um, gives them a bad impression. So, what's a way that we might live to prevent our friends and family from developing that presuppositional bias? Well, we could live our faith, right? We could do what we ought to be doing. So that would be one thing. Be a good thing. There are times when our friends or family members resist our efforts to share the truth of Christianity. How might the understanding of the beyond a reasonable doubt standard of proof help us overcome the resistance? Well, the whole beyond a reasonable doubt conversation is a discussion of what's possible versus what's reasonable. So a person can always come up with something that's possible. There's no shortage of things that are possible. You could always bring up something, an objection or something that's possible, but we have to kind of focus on what's reasonable. One of the things that, if you follow Frank Turek and his cross-examined ministry, a lot of times there's a tactic that he has that when it becomes clear someone's just throwing up as many objectives as possible, in order to find out if they're truly interested in finding out what's true or not, or whether they're just trying to throw up more objections, he'll just stop the conversation and say, hey, if I could prove to you beyond any doubt that Christianity was true, would you become a Christian? And so that really just exposes the intent right there. Because if somebody says, well, no, I would not, then, that makes it pretty clear they're not interested in finding out what the truth. They're just trying to throw out more objections. Whereas, well, and a lot of people would say this, though, yeah, well, sure, if you prove to me that Christianity is true, certainly I'd become a Christian. That makes it more of a conversation about finding out what's true versus just throwing out arguments. So, okay, we're gonna interject another little video here real quick, where Jim is talking about specifically the topic of abductive reasoning here. So let's break for that video, and then we'll jump right back into our study here. So let's check it out.
First principle of investigations. Do not have a presupposition that keeps you from investigating something. Don't think you know the answer before you even start investigating. Because if you think you know the answer to this, a good chance you're not going to get to the right point. You're going to miss something. So what we're trying to do here is figure out what is the most reasonable inference from evidence, because that is the jury standard. By the way, we're not trying to prove things beyond a possible doubt. I could never prove anything. I've never had a case I could prove beyond a possible doubt. We have a jury instruction for this. We're aiming for reasonable doubt. That's a lower standard. That makes sense? Anything and everything is possible, but not everything is reasonable. There are philosophers, serious philosophers today, who believe we are in a universe that is nothing more than a computer simulation. That's possible. But is that reasonable? This is what we're after. Now, how do we determine if something is reasonable? That's the trick. How do you do that? Well, that's what I'm going to teach you this morning. But I have to show you something gruesome before I can start. I have to show you a dead body, okay? So we're going to do a little dead body work today. We're going to do a little death investigation 101, all right? Lucky for you, this dead guy looks suspiciously like my son Jimmy. Back when he used to work at Trader Joe's. Okay? So you can tell how old this presentation is. Now, when we find somebody's dead in a room, we're not quite sure we have a criminal case yet, because there are more than one way. There's 4 ways to die. Only one of those ways is criminal. We got to figure out which of these 4 ways this guy died. How we do that is we make a list of evidences and compare the evidences to the explanations in the room. How can we explain what we're seeing in the room? So far, the only evidence we have is a dead guy laying face down. How do you explain dead guys laying face down? Well, he might have died by some natural cause. He might have accidentally died. He might have killed himself. He might have been killed by somebody else. These are the 4 ways that people die. The question is, which of these ways is most reasonable? And I know people are taking photographs. I'm going to send you this whole video. You're going to get it today. I'm going to send it to you today by text. So just relax. Don't need to take any pictures, okay? This is a 17-hour course I teach at Biola. There's no way I could do the whole thing here. So I'm just going to send you all the material, okay? Does that sound good? All right. So what do I do so far? I got a dead guy laying. Can I cross out any of these possible explanations given the evidence in the room so far? Not really. I mean, if he had a heart attack, he would look like that. If he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like this. If he intentionally took too many pills, he would look like this. If I poisoned him with too many pills, he would look like this. So far, everything is not only possible, it's all equally reasonable. Let's change our scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down, but he's in a pool of his own blood, center torso? That would change things. Let's add that to our list. Can I cross out something now? What can I cross out? Yeah, I mean, look, is there some rare medical condition in which you could bleed from no opening in your center torso? Maybe possible, but I'm not after possible. I'm after reasonable. I can cross that one out. But until I roll him over, I can't cross out anything else. Let's change our scenario. What if he's a dead guy who's laying face down in a pool of his own blood, and now he's got a big honking knife sticking out of his back? Okay, why are you laughing at the knife in the back part? I don't know. By the way, this is my resurrection talk for Easter Sunday at churches, which is like a weird kind of a talk, right? Okay, so now we have to add this piece of evidence. Can I cross out something here? I think I can at least cross out. I mean, I don't know how you could accidentally get me. It's possible, but I'm going to go ahead and cross that accidental. But it is low enough that I could do this to myself. And we see a lot of crazy suicides because a lot of the suicides we investigate are drug-induced suicides. So I'm going to leave that last one in for now. Let's change the scenario, though. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood with multiple stab wounds, upper back? This changes things. And now I think we have to kind of at least, I think I can cross out suicide, unless you're just incredibly gifted, flexible, and have a high tolerance for pain. But for sure, if there was bloody footprints leading out of the room, you would know there's no way to explain that. So if I added that additional element, now we have a good reason to believe that this is a homicide. Are we all on the same page here so far? What we basically did was we compared the explanations to the evidences in the room. By the way, Jimmy is still alive, okay? He went to UCLA. I went to UCLA. We are both Bruins, okay? My son David is a doctor. He went to USC. He's a communist, okay, just so you know. That's the difference, basically, between those two things. Now, this process that we just talked about is a process known as abductive reasoning, and I drew it in the book so you can see it. This is from Cold Case Christianity. This process is a very common skill that detectives use, and we also asked jurors to employ this same process in jury deliberation. Now, why does this matter? Because when I was first looking at the case for Christianity, I knew that there was one piece of evidence that was more important than any other piece of evidence, according to Paul at least. It's this idea of the resurrection. If we have not been telling you the truth about the resurrection, you not only have no hope of your own resurrection, but we have been lying to you. And if that's the case, why would I trust you for anything? This was the most important, to me, thing to investigate. Why couldn't we use deductive reasoning for this? Why couldn't we list the evidences in the room and then the explanations for the evidence and determine which is the most reasonable? Now, what would count as an evidence in the room? I would have told you as an atheist, and I was the very, very committed atheist. I was the kind of atheist who read. Before the new atheist, I would read a lot, and I would push back against the people who were Christians in my life because they were lame Christians. The officers I knew could not tell you why I should trust the Bible. They had no more reason for me to trust the Bible than someone could trust the Book of Mormon. They couldn't give me 4 reasons why I should trust the Bible. And the other group I met who were Christians were the people we were taking to jail, because a lot of those folks would tell us they were Christians. So both of those groups were unappealing to me. But I did believe some things about the resurrection as an atheist, and that was the minimal place you could get me to start. I would have said, yeah, I believe that Jesus was crucified. I'm not a Jesus myther, okay? There are a lot of those out there right now. But I mean, I think that the evidence is, why would you think that Jesus never even lived? There's not any good reason to believe that. But so what? Okay, so he lived, he's crucified, he's buried. That happens every day in some place in the world today. Someone will probably be crucified for their faith in Christ. This does not make Christianity true. That could be true, yet Christianity still be false. The fact that Jesus lived and was died on a cross and was buried does not make Christianity true. Now, people, there was an empty tomb. Because clearly, if you wanted to end this in the first century, here's how you do it. You get the body of Jesus, you drag it around town. That's game over. Or you get the initial alleged eyewitnesses to recant. That would also be game over. Those things didn't happen, but this does not make it true. These two things could be true, yet Christianity could still be false. I believe those two things were true, yet I believe Christianity was false. Third thing, these folks said they saw the risen Christ. So? A lot of people, you work this job long enough, you're going to find out that people say all kinds of stupid, crazy things. Does not make them true. And finally, they did seem to be committed to this lie, or to this fabrication, or to this illusion, whatever it was. All four of these things could be true, yet Christianity could still be false. This is where I stood as a non-Christian. I'll give you those four things. Now, I have to explain them, though. And I would have offered one of 6 ways to explain these as an atheist. I will list them here for you. The 7th is your way on the bottom. Now, we're not going to be able to talk about all these today. We're going to go fast as we can through a couple of them. And I'll send you the rest in the video, okay?
Okay, continuing in our group investigation, there are 3 basic types of reasoning, and this is out of the study of logic, really. Deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, abductive reasoning. We're not going to talk about deductive and inductive, really, because that's not kind of a sidebar discussion, but abductive reasoning is a form of logical inference that seeks the simplest and most likely conclusion from a set of observations, right? So imagine you've been called to the scene of a DBR, a dead body report, as Jim described in the video. So use abductive reasoning to determine the most reasonable explanation. Examine the scene illustrated below from the book Cold Case Christianity. Given the evidence described in the diagram, which of the 4 potential explanations is most reasonable? So we're going to cross out the explanations that are unreasonable and then write why we think the explanation we picked is most reasonable. So we went through this in the video. We're just kind of reviewing this. We got a person, dead person, lying face down. 4 possibilities for cause of death: natural death, accidental death, suicide, homicide. Okay. Pool of blood, right? We can probably, most likely, cross out natural death. Someone, we were talking about it the other day, someone said, well, if they explode, yes, if they exploded, they might be lying in a pool of blood, but that's probably not natural death. It might be, but so most likely, probably we can cross out natural death. Okay, here we have a knife in the back. It's possible that could be accidental, Sure, there's some way that could happen, but it's probably not correct. Multiple stab wounds, right? Probably could cross out suicide, unless you're very, very flexible and have a extremely high tolerance for pain and really want to commit suicide very badly. So we've kind of narrowed it down. The most reasonable explanation would appear to be homicide there. So, right. The thing about abductive reasoning, I mean, it's a skill that each of us can employ on a daily basis. All right. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but let's let it suffice to say that we could apply abductive reasoning in various aspects of our lives and in the world. I mean, you could use abductive reasoning to try to figure out how to make the best decision in terms of purchasing a new car, deciding who to marry, and like we're talking about specifically here, deciding what's true about God. All right. So let's look at that, kind of moves into talking about the minimal facts approach. Dr. Gary Habermas. Um, Dr. Gary Habermas has taken the time to identify the quote minimal facts or evidence related to the resurrection. So while there are many claims in the New Testament related to this important event, not all are accepted by skeptics and wary investigators. So Dr. Habermas surveyed the most respected and well-established historical scholars and identified a number of facts that are accepted by the vast majority of researchers in the field. So let's consider the following minimal facts about the resurrection. Jesus died on the cross and was buried. Jesus' tomb was empty and no one ever produced his body. Jesus' disciples believed they saw Jesus resurrected from the dead, and Jesus' disciples were transformed following their alleged resurrection observations. Okay, so these are facts that most scholars, historians, would agree on, even when you're talking to non-believers. Okay, you hear a lot of people. I mean, in conversation, you hear people declare that, well, Jesus, the Bible's a completely made up book and Jesus never existed. But if you study history and talk to historians, any historian would tell you that, there's just no doubt that Jesus existed. There's no historian who would um, deny that Jesus existed. Right. So I've got a book here. I'm looking at a book on my bookshelf called Heroes of History by Will Durant, and he was a Presidential Medal of Freedom historian. Him and his wife Ariel wrote a number of books, historical works, and when he's talking about Jesus in his book, uh, guess where he takes his historical sources from? The Bible. And so, he makes the statement in his book that no serious historian would doubt that Jesus existed. So Dr. Habermas has taken these and just saying these are the minimal facts that everyone can agree on. So these are like the observations that we were talking about when we were evaluating a dead body. We're looking at this dead body on the ground, okay, blood all over the place, a knife in the back, multiple stab wounds. These are observations when we're talking about and evaluating the truth of Christianity. So this is Dr. Habermas. Um, He's written and co-written several books about the historical Jesus, ancient evidence for the life of Christ. Evidence for the historical Jesus is Jesus of history, the Christ of faith. And then he co-wrote a book with Michael Licona, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. And I've had the privilege of seeing Dr. Habermas speak. He was at one of the SES apologetics conferences down in Charlotte. But the minimal facts approach, he's a distinguished research professor at Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary and has popularized the minimal facts approach to examining the resurrection. So he limited his list of facts to those that were strongly supported using the criteria of textual critics and to those facts that were granted by virtually all scholars, from skeptics to believers. So Habermas eventually wrote about his findings in The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. So let's evaluate some of these. And you could spend a lot of time really doing deep dive evaluation of these alternate explanations. is what they're referred to. But here's some objections to the resurrection. So let's look at these. This is some discussion here. Jesus didn't really die on the cross. The disciples lied about the resurrection. The disciples hallucinated the resurrection, or the resurrection truly occurred. So I would invite you to do some research, read some of the books that Dr. Habermas has put out, or any book on the resurrection, or read the Bible. If we take the Bible as a true historical account, there are some things that we can take out of the Bible that would shed light on some of these alternate explanations. Jesus didn't really die on the cross. Well, that's one. There's a very interesting paper that I it was from the it was actually a medical paper, okay, and it was talking about the nature of the crucifixion of Jesus, and the description in the Bible of how he died and everything. And this was a medical doctor looking at the evidence and describing the physiological process, and how the biblical account would lead one to believe that he certainly would have died from what was done to him. And so there's evidence that you can look at to refute this alternate explanation, and really all of these. The disciples lied about the resurrection. Well, you can look at the example. I mean, there are lots of things that people are willing to die for, right? There are a lot of people who are willing to give their life for something that they believe, but nobody's going to give their life for something that they know to be a lie. And so the disciples were in a place to know whether what they were claiming was true or not. And so, they certainly, all the biblical, the gospel writers, all the disciples, except for John, were martyred. And so they died for their faith. And so, they certainly wouldn't have given their life for something that they knew to be a lie. And so, we can refute that alternate explanation with that reasoning. The disciples hallucinated the resurrection. Well, there, when you look at the biblical account, and again, if we're accepting the biblical account as a historical record, then there were witnesses to Christ, to his resurrection. And so there's evidence that doesn't just rely on what the disciples wrote, but people saw Jesus, after the resurrection, other than the disciples. So there's additional evidence. And so if you can cross those out, then you're kind of left with, the resurrection truly occurred. So you could spend a lot of time going through these, and I would recommend that you research and look at these alternate explanations and the minimal facts. Evaluate that for yourself. Have some discussion with others about it, and but there's certainly an ample evidence to come to a reasonable and right conclusion. So now, given the evidence you've examined in the chart and the evidence described in the following diagram, which of the four potential explanations is more reasonable? So cross out the explanations that are unreasonable and write why you think the explanation you've picked is most reasonable. So if we look at these minimal facts, Jesus died and was buried. The tomb was empty. The disciples claimed to see Jesus resurrected. The disciples were transformed after his alleged resurrection. And we look at those alternate explanations. Upon evaluation and discussion, of each of them, we can cross out these objections that they were wrong, that they were lying, that they were delusional, that they were fooled, they were influenced, they were distorted, and we come to the conclusion that in the end that they were accurate. And I would challenge you to dive in to review this part in the book and go through some of these arguments for yourself uh, in the book. Okay, so personal assessment. We're going to bring this home. Think back to before you were a Christian. What presuppositional beliefs or interests do you think you might have held that distracted or prevented you from hearing the claims of Christianity? And how did you overcome them? Okay. Do you think you have enough evidence beyond your own personal experience to demonstrate to others that God exists or that Christianity is true? What kind of evidence would you share? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to form a strategic plan. Let's take some action. We're going to make this personal. Okay, think about the presuppositions of one person you would like to see come to faith and write them down in the space provided. So, what might you do specifically to help them recognize that we all hold presuppositions? Okay, so just recognizing that we have presuppositions is one step toward kind of overcoming those. A lot of people, we have them, but we're not even aware of it. Okay, good to note that good intentions alone rarely take us very far in our efforts. So, are you willing to make a strategic plan of action and commit your plan to a date on a calendar? If so, write down a date this week when you will initiate a plan of action to begin addressing the presuppositions of the person you identified above. So, don't just think about it. Do think about it, but don't just think about it. Think about it, put together a plan, but make a commitment to bringing that plan to action and putting it to work and actually have a conversation with someone. Okay. All right. Closing statement. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll close out. So let's pray. Great, gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much just for all that you are and all that you do. Thank you for making a way for all the people that you've created to be able to spend eternity with you. Thank you for your word, the Bible that tells us how. Thank you for Jesus who was willing to be the sacrifice. And we just ask that you would help each one of us to take this information that we've heard today and put it to use in our lives, that we might share your truth with others, and that they might and that through that they might come to know you. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So, uh, you know, there's plenty more to go through. We got a limited time in person here, but there's plenty of more material if you want to read through the book, read through the study guide. So read on your own for a better understanding, just to better grasp the issues raised in this session. Read the alternative explanations for the resurrection for Jesus listed in Cold Case Christianity, Chapter 2. Learn how to infer. So take notes specifically for the section entitled An Ancient Death Scene Investigation, okay, on pages 40 through 50. So thanks so much, and we'll catch you next time around. So next week we'll be going through the lesson titled Think Circumstantially and Test Your Witnesses. Thanks for coming out, and we'll catch you next time.